Hello again, it's Charles Kelly, Money Tips. Good to see you back, and I hope you're having a great day. Today I want to talk to you about property, and in particular freeholds and leaseholds. And you've probably all heard that you can buy a property generally in the UK as a freehold, which means you own the land on which the property is placed, or you can buy leasehold, where you don't own the land, but you have a right to stay on that in that property for a certain period of time. A lease can be 6 months, it could be 600 years, it can be 999 years. So that's the difference between a leasehold and a freehold. And I've said in the past that leaseholds can be a bit of a legal nightmare, a minefield rather, and that's why I always prefer to buy freehold, which is usually very straightforward. However, when is a freehold itself still not worth the paper it's written on, or when is there more to it than first appears? Now, you might have a freehold house. You think, well, that's fine. That's a freehold house. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll buy it. A lot of people do so at auction. They say, well, that's a house. It's a freehold. Yeah, I'm going to buy that. But there could be problems with the freehold title. It could be a defective title. There could be restrictions such as covenants that restrict the use or the access to the land. You could have it could be landlocked. You might not have proper access to the property. So there's all sorts of things that can happen. There could be uncontaminated land. There could be building issues as well, which is not quite the freehold, but the building itself could be made of a construction that is unmortgageable. Certain concrete constructions are still unmortgageable, and means that the property might have to be rebuilt. And there still might be works coming through the area which could affect your property and the value of your property. I mean, people on the HS2 route now have had to, a lot of their properties have become virtually worthless because they're not near enough to the site to the rail site to be bought out but by the government to be compulsorily purchased, but they're still near enough that nobody'd want to buy it. So there's all sorts of things that can happen. And normally when you buy a property, you have a solicitor, and the solicitor checks everything out for you. But a lot of people go to auctions and put their hand up at the auction and buy something and haven't done the proper checks, or maybe have read the legal pack and scantily just gone over it. Oh yeah, that looks all right. And then they just buy it. You see people on that Homes Under the Hammer buying stuff just on spec, and said, well, I went there and I tried to buy something else and I decided I didn't get that, but I thought I'd buy this one now, and they just bid on it and buy it, and then they're stuck with a problem. Some of these can be building problems which can be sorted out, but a defective freehold title or something that can be very difficult. So that's all pretty standard, right? I think you probably realise that you should use a solicitor if you're going to buy it at auction. Make sure you check out the legal pack in good time so that your solicitor can have a look at that and make sure that you're not buying a duff property or a lemon. However, there are situations more recently where people are buying properties in good faith, which then turn out to be difficult and certainly in some cases not unmortgageable, but virtually unmortgageable, has certainly proven difficult to sell. And these are properties bought on new build estates where builders are building quite large estates now. I mean, if you go out of, say Buckinghamshire, Aylesbury, for instance, there's huge estates going up there, huge developments, and these estates have roads. Obviously, the builder will build roads going through them, and normally the local authority would adopt those roads, so they become part of the local authority roads. But in some cases, the local authority are not doing that, and therefore the developer still has control of these roads and still has to maintain these roads. So they will put on a charge to everybody in that estate to upkeep the property. And this has proved difficult for some people where they think they're buying a freehold house, and they get the house, and perhaps the mortgage is arranged through the builder on a sort of a block plan with Santander or the Halifax, and they've all got their mortgages and they all feel fine. But in some cases, it's proved difficult to sell the property on when the new lender realises that there's this rent charge and all sorts of restrictions on the estate. Now, I've had a property on a new estate which we didn't have this problem, but there were issues there, and sometimes you need a management plan, because this estate had mostly houses, but it had a couple of small blocks of flats, and you could see that you needed management of the whole estate because it was getting a bit out of hand. And it's understandable that there should be some charge. But if you've got a rent charge, some of these are quite severe sort of charges. They can be quite high. And in some cases, if homeowners fail to pay their rent charge and fall 40 days behind with their payments, the law on estate rent charges allows developers or management companies to take possession of your property to ensure that they get their money back. Now, this is a bit like a leasehold. This is why, if you don't pay your charges on a lease, you don't pay your ground rent and that sort of thing, in theory, your home could be repossessed. But you don't expect that with a freehold house. And, however, the Home Builders Federation say that rent charges are the fairest way to make sure that communal areas are paid for and maintained. Well, that's one thing, but when it comes to sort of roads, I mean, if it's communal gardens and that sort of thing, that's one thing. But when it comes to maintaining roads and that sort of thing, it can be quite expensive. And one couple that was highlighted by the BBC, a couple tried to sell their property. They bought the house in Oxfordshire back in 2016. And they were informed about a service charge, which they thought was fine. They'd lived in London before. They'd been used to service charges in flats. But they were not told by their solicitor or the agents that what a rent charge actually means in terms of law. And a lot of people might not know this term rent charge. So anyway, they come to sell it and then find that the new lender for the buyer says, no, they're not going to give a mortgage on it because your property is unmortgageable. So suddenly they feel that their house is unsellable. Now, that may not be the case, because just because one lender will not lend on a property, it doesn't mean that it's unmortgageable. That you can get a mortgage on virtually any property of some sort. It might cost more, it might be with certain lenders, but obviously the lender that their buyer used may have been a bit fussy about this sort of thing. I mean, in general, banks can be a bit more fussy than building societies on construction issues and properties and that sort of thing. When it comes to property, sometimes a traditional building society can be a bit more flexible than a bank, like a sort of a NatWest bank. They're particularly fussy on everything, and whereas you go down to the Halifax and the Santander, and we'll give you a mortgage. So it doesn't mean it's actually unmortgageable. But these people have paid about $2,500 in charges, and there's another $1,500 due, and they're hoping that they'll be able to sell their house. So what I'm saying here is that you've got to be careful, and the Conveyancing Association are calling for reform on this, and it says we need the government to intervene to change the law, as someone cannot effectively lose thousands of pounds because they forgot to pay, say, a £10 rent charge. Well, I'm not sure that does happen, but it could happen. And the other things with these estates is that if you're buying leasehold properties, the ground rents, instead of being the old £25 and £50 and £100 a year, they can be £300 a year, £400 a year, with quite regular increases. A lot of the old ground rent charges on leases would not go up until, say, 25 years, but some of these are going up every 5 to 10 years. And in fact, the government have told developers they've got to stop this because it is causing problems. And a lot of people have bought these new properties with the Help to Buy scheme, because the Help to Buy scheme was mainly available for these new build properties. So, it's not like they've had much choice. They've gone to a builder that said, yeah, we can do the Help to Buy, and this is the estate that's going up, the property's available. Normally you have like a big mass viewing and you put your name down and you've got 30 days to exchange. So it can all be a bit rushed with these new build schemes. And sometimes people have got into a situation where they bought something that they're not very happy with. So if you're buying properties on a new build, whether you're a developer or an investor or a first-time buyer or whatever, just make sure that you understand what's going on with all these things like rent charges and any communal service charges, because it can be a problem. And if you want to get into property, my suggestion is you learn about it before you just rush out and buy stuff. I can put you onto some free courses where you can learn a lot in maybe a taste a day or a taste a weekend, where you can get the basics of most types of strategies, which could be buy to let, it could be HMO, houses in multiple occupation, it could be buy and refurbish and flip on to somebody else, add value to the property. And it could be strategies to buy property using none of your own money. So if you're interested in that, drop me a line on Messenger, on Facebook, or at charles@charleskelly.net. So thanks for listening. Thanks for everyone who tuned in on Facebook Live. Ronnie, Mike, David, Anthony, Solar. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate that. Appreciate your comments as well if you find this interesting. And if you're interested in learning about property and becoming a property investor, just make sure you do it properly. And if you can't go on a course, at least read a book or something, because it is very difficult. Don't just rush out to an auction and put your hand up, because that is very, very dangerous. A lot of auction properties, in my own experience, and people might disagree with me, have got a problem. That's why they're in the auction, because the auction is the ultimate. What is the value of this property at the bottom end? The bottom price of this property. What someone will be prepared to pay for it, and that is the auction. And if you can't sell your property on an open market through an agent, you can generally stick it in the auction and you'll get it sold, but at a low price. And there's often problems with properties at auctions, just like a car, for instance, can go into an auction and have a problem. But with the property, you've got to be careful, and it's very much buyer beware. So they say, there's the legal pack. You've got to read it. You've got to do your own survey before the auction. You've got to make sure you've got the money, because when you put your hand up and the hammer goes down, you've got to pay 10% there and then you've got usually 28 days to complete. Otherwise, you'll be penalised and you could lose your deposit and be charged interest on the balance. So you've got to do a lot of preparation before an auction. I looked at an auction property last weekend. To me, it didn't seem good value, but there were a lot of people there, and somebody will probably bid on that, and they'll have to spend a lot of money on it. And whether or not they'll get value out of it, I don't think so. This particular property had a problem because there was an old shop there, which has been, and what they've done is converted the property into a flat downstairs and a flat upstairs. But one of the flats overhangs the shop, which has been sort of cordoned off with this wooden partition, and you can almost put your fist through the wall of that into the shop, and the shop's closed off anyway. So if you were buying the whole lot as a freehold with the shop and the two flats, that's fine. But for some reason they've held back on the shop, so it's going to be a difficult one. What are they going to do with that shop? You've got a flat overhanging the shop with a wooden kind of partition between the shop. It's not even a proper wall, and who knows what that shop will become. It could become a fast food takeaway, which means that you might have difficulty with insurance. You certainly have difficulty getting a mortgage on that type of property above, on a flat above a fast food shop. You'll get a mortgage somewhere, but it will be difficult. Also, the property, I don't think, has been divided into flats by any proper standards. I don't know what the leases are like. I don't know whether it's been building controls there. So you've got to look at all these things before you bid on anything. You've got to be very, very careful there. So whether people will get good value at the auction on that particular property, I don't know. So I looked at, to give you another example, I looked at a shop which also had flats a couple of months ago in Hertfordshire, and that looked a great deal. I thought, yeah, this is really good. I knew the agent. He said, come around and see this. I think you'll like it. I said, yeah, I like it. But when I did a search, instead of waiting for the solicitors, what I did was just did a land registry search on the property. I found that the back garden, because the shop premises, there was a flat at the back, and then you come out into this garden at the back, which is all hemmed in by walls from other properties. But for some reason, they've kept the back garden separate. So the back garden is not included in the shop. And there's a back door with an alleyway and into the flat that's at the back of the shop, and that goes into the back garden, and you haven't got access rights to it. So I could see from the plan, I said to the solicitor, well, this doesn't look right. The garden's not included in the property, and there's no access rights of what I could see, because it was in red. And he said, yeah, you're right, don't touch it with a barge pole. It looks cheap on paper, but it's not really, because they're really selling you something that's not worth what you're paying for it, because they've kept the part of the property which is the garden. So it means you can't extend there. But not only that, what would they do with the garden anyway? It's landlocked. Maybe they're going to build something there in the future without your permission, because you haven't even got access rights to the flat at the back of the shop. So what I'm saying is, just be careful because freehold is freehold, but it doesn't always mean it's a good freehold. There can be problems with a freehold, and some freeholds can be less than the paper they're written on. So just take care, and as I said, learn about property before you invest in it. Give me a shout on charles@charleskelly.net or on Facebook Messenger if you're on Facebook now, and we'll put you onto a free taster day to learn about property and learn how you can get into property using none of your own money. So thanks for listening, and bye for now.